Hey everybody, and welcome to the first ever Arcomade Blender tutorial. So today we're going to go over this waterbending effect. So this isn't really meant to be a beginner tutorial, but I'll try to be as detailed as I can. If you've never even touched Blender before, you'll definitely want to start with some more basic tutorials. I'll have some links down in the video description to some of the videos that helped me when I was first getting started. So I went ahead and made this little scene for us to work with here. Nothing special, just a flat plane with the water texture from BlendKit and this video clip of me doing some waterbending movements. If you're not familiar with working with keyed footage and images as planes in Blender, I would recommend Ian Hubert's tutorial on green screens. Again, links in the description below. You could of course do this effect on its own and composite it into a non-CG environment, but I already had this clip, so we'll be working with this. So you can see the movements here. I basically just copied the avatar opening, and the first thing we're going to do is create a Bezier curve that follows along the path that we want our water to travel. So we'll go ahead and Shift A, add a Bezier curve. We'll go ahead and rotate it up, bring it a little more forward here. And we'll just kind of get a path here going. So we'll have it come from the center. Tap into edit mode. And to make these new lines, I'm just hitting E to extrude and going in the direction I want them. And you press R to rotate. But what I'm basically going to do is have the water kind of follow this hand. So it'll come from the center and it'll go up towards this hand. Go a little higher. You see it's going to go around here. And you want to try to keep your curves as obtuse as possible, so you don't want any sharp turns because it tends to deform kind of weird. All right, so I think we have a pretty decent starting point here for our path for our water. We'll go ahead and rename that to water path. And now we can actually start working on the mesh that will become our water. So we'll turn off Eevee for a minute here. Go over to add, Shift A to add mesh. And we're going to add a round cube. And I like to use these round cubes because they tend to subdivide a little better. Make sure you set your radius to 1. Otherwise it'll look more like a square than a sphere. And we're just going to move this in a little bit, maybe scale it down. And remember to apply your scale with Control A, scale. And we're going to go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier. And we'll put the subdivisions pretty high because we're going to displace this later. And before we go any further, we're going to need to also add a lattice. So we add this lattice here, Shift A, add lattice. I'm going to bring it over towards our circle. Let's go ahead and turn to the front view, or I guess the side view, and bring this over. So you want it just inside of your sphere. And we're going to go over to the lattice properties down here and bring the resolution up to around 7 on every area. And we'll go ahead and click outside so we don't have to worry about those inside points when we're when we're deforming our mesh. Okay, and from here we're going to click on our sphere and then our lattice, Control P, and we're going to comparent lattice deform. So now when we move our lattice, our sphere will move with it. So from here we're going to make some shape keys for a lattice. And the reason I like to use this lattice is because it makes sure that it does your mesh displacement after it's subdivided. So it keeps the displacement nice and smooth instead of creating these weird kind of shapes once you start animating it. So click on the lattice, go to lattice properties, go down to here to shape keys, and we're going to add, let's start off with the basis and 3 extras just to be sure. And what I like to make is a sort of teardrop shape. Another teardrop shape going in the opposite direction. And also a kind of spike shape. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and rename our lattice. And let's name our mesh too. Okay, so from that, we're going to go select one of our shape keys. We'll start with the teardrop. I'm gonna go into X-ray mode so I can see everything. Go to front view. And then we're just gonna actually go to the top over here. Go to tab into edit mode. You're gonna select this very top vertex. Make sure you have proportional editing on. You're gonna start dragging that up. And you wanna just try to get an even, sort of an even shape. I have a hard time seeing here. And then you wanna keep your volume the same. So after you bring that up, make sure you scale it down. A to select all, S to scale, Shift C to constrain it to the X and Y axis. And then you scale that down. And then if we go out of this, we should see our teardrop kind of change shape. I don't think I did that very well. Let's shrink it down a little bit more. And you can go pretty crazy with this because you get to choose how far you want it to go later. And you can always change it afterwards. As long as you keep your basis shape key, then you'll always be able to kind of reset. So never mess with this one. Okay, we'll go to this other teardrop. Create a tear in the opposite direction. Again, select this middle. Bring that down. Scale the rest in. I probably could have just rotated the other shape key, but oh well. See how that looks. It's probably fine. And then the last one will make this kind of spike shape. So I'll select this, bring that up. And then also one of the bottom ones. I know I'm probably working a little inefficiently here, but for some reason I feel more pressure than usual. So I'll just move this up here so you guys can see what this looks like. So we have our teardrop shape. We have a second teardrop shape going in the opposite direction, just so we don't have to change things around later. And then we have our kind of spike shape where it's just the water stretched out. And again, we can change this later if we need to. So I'll bring that water down here. And now we can actually start displacing this. So we're gonna select our sphere, add another modifier. And where is it? Displace. Okay, so we have our displacement modifier, click on new. And then we're gonna click on this tab right here to go into the textures tab right here. Click on clouds. So we're changing the displacement type to clouds. And then we're gonna bring the size way up, pretty high. And we'll dial this in later. Let me bring the strength down a bit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this for now, and you can see it's looking a little bit more like water now, but the problem is when we actually move our mesh around, it just looks kind of like a rock more than water. So we have to take our displacements and kind of separate it from the mesh, separate its coordinates from the mesh. So we're going to add an empty. We'll just add these plane axis. I'll bring this over here so you can kind of see what's happening. Click on our mesh, and we're going to set the coordinates to object and set our object to the empty that we just created. And let's go ahead and rename this empty. We'll name it to displacement control. And now you see when we move the empty or the mesh, the displacement will move separate from the object, and it kind of looks like this sort of amorphous, blobby kind of water. And we can animate this. So we're going to move back a few frames, add a keyframe, location, rotation, and scale, and then we're going to bring this, just move it down. It doesn't really matter which way you move it, as long as you have that movement in there. I forgot to move forward a few frames. So move forward some frames first, and then move it down and add a keyframe. Let's see how that looks. And it's moving a bit slow. Let's go ahead and turn the subdivisions down for now. But you do want to keep the subdivisions pretty high because it tends to shade kind of weird. Let's go ahead and shade smooth as well. And weird stuff starts happening if you don't have enough subdivisions on objects with glass or water materials. You get these like weird black spots in the thicker areas or the corners of the mesh. So you want to put a decent amount of subdivisions on it. So it's looking a little bit more like water. And then the cool thing about this is later on, if you want to make the water look a little more active, all you have to do is go to your empty and add a few extra keyframes and make it move faster for a second, and then you can bring it back to its regular speed. Okay, so now we can actually start animating our water, and what we're gonna do is add a curve modifier to our lattice. So go ahead and add a curve modifier to lattice, and we're gonna select the little curve that we were animating, that we were drawing earlier. And it looks to be in a decent place. So you see if we move it on the Z-axis, it'll follow the curve that we drew, and it deforms nice and naturally and looks pretty smooth. There are other ways you could animate this, but I like to use the curve for most cases. Let's go ahead and maybe scale this down. And remember to apply your scale. Or maybe not. Let's keep the scale. Sometimes you want to apply scale, sometimes you don't. Let's make sure our water still looks like water. Let's change this. So sometimes working with lattices can be a little annoying. You just have to adjust things as you go. So if this isn't moving along the axis that you want it to move, all you have to do is go back to your modifier and you can change the deform axis. But I think we're good. Let's double check and see how our shape keys look. So it should be traveling along the curve. So if we go to our spike here, yep, it's stretching along the curve. So that's good. So now we can actually animate our water. And what we're gonna do, let's make sure it actually is centered on the curve. So I'll move up here, just kind of adjust it a little bit. Now it's moving. Now it's moving correctly. All right, so we're gonna move it underneath our water plane. And we're gonna start as a sphere. So I'll show you here. We're gonna go into Eevee. So as it comes up, it's gonna start as a sphere in the bottom down here. It's gonna kind of turn into a spike as it lifts up. It's gonna stretch out, and then it'll quickly turn into a teardrop as we bring it across here. It'll ball up over here, and then as we shoot it out, it'll kind of go into another teardrop shape. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's turn on auto keyframing just to make things a little easier. Add a keyframe at the start down here. So before you start animating, make sure you have all of your shape keys ready to be keyframed. So just click this little animating node or animate property down here, and we'll move those back a bit. We want it to start as a sphere. We'll leave it here actually. We want it to start as a sphere and then turn into a spike as it goes up. And then let's also add a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale down here. And then we'll start following the water bending movements here. So it should kind of move to the top around over here. Let's bring it in let's keep it in the top. And then we'll make it that spiky shape as it comes up. And then I might shrink this actually, but let's see how it looks first. So it's gonna come up. I think that is actually too fast for the displacement. But let's bring it down here. Okay, so I have it kind of animated here, but I want this to be smaller. So I'm gonna go to my spike shape key. I'm gonna tab into edit mode with my lattice selected. And it kind of disappears since it's on this curve. So we're gonna hit A to select all and then hit the numpad period key. And then we can kind of see where our lattice went. And let's just shrink this down a little bit. All right, so now we have something that's looking kind of decent. And we'll go ahead and move on for now. So it's gonna, again, follow this hand. As it goes down, it's gonna turn into more of a teardrop shape. So we'll make sure we have our spike keyframed over here. And it is, so good. And then let's also make sure its position is keyframed here. I'm gonna move it over around here. Again, make sure you're always moving along the z-axis so it stays on our curve. So let's bring it around the middle actually. So around here. And as that happens, it's gonna become less of a spike and more of a teardrop, not that one. So that's why we make two teardrops, so we make sure it goes in the direction we want. We might actually make this one a little bigger. So let's go into edit mode. Okay, so I went ahead and made a new shape key just to kind of get the look that I wanted. And what I did was kind of make it bigger towards the end and made it a little longer down here. And you want to make sure you have these all these little segments kind of evenly spaced, that way it deforms correctly. And then going back to our animating now, we're gonna make sure we also keyframe whichever shape key we're gonna go to next so that it doesn't immediately start going over it way back over here before we want it to actually happen. So we have it kind of stopping over here, and these sharp turns are kind of hard to deal with, but let's just animate it all the way through to the end, and then we'll deal with it in a second. But we want it to stay in a sphere over here, so let's go ahead and keyframe our shape key one more time, and then it's going to turn into a teardrop again around here. It's going to be more up here, so let's do that. And if you want to move the water down a little bit, you can. You just want to move the whole curve, so we'll actually keyframe our curve real quick. And we'll have the water go down just a little bit here. And you could also do this on the curve, but I kind of like the way it looks when you just move everything. So we'll move our lattice and our curve, and that way it kind of has a kind of a new dimension in its movement. So it's very subtle, but you see the curve kind of moves down a little bit over here. Maybe we'll have it go up a little later. Okay, so I'm having this issue where the shape key is making it move back because it kind of changes shape in its center. So part of it is going backwards while the other part's going forward. And normally I would just go into the shape key and move it so that the origin is more up front. But in this case, I think we can just kind of make up for it by moving the object a little faster. Okay, so it's a little rough, but I got something that sort of works here. And I went ahead and added one more shape key to make it a little bit bigger here, because the size was a little bit off. The volume was a little bit off. And let's also change our displacement one more time. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit more active. So around there, it looks pretty good. And like I said, you just want to keep fine-tuning things until you get it at a level where you feel okay about it. So let's go ahead and finish up. So we're going to add our water material onto this now. So we'll go ahead and click on our mesh, go into the shading tab. Let's turn on Eevee. And we'll turn off the overlays just so we can see a little bit better. And what I usually like to use is just a simple, get rid of the principled BSDF. I just usually use a glass shader. And I'll mix that with a transparent shader. And we'll set the index of refraction to 1.33, which is the index for water. And you just kind of look that up. You want to have the node Wrangler on, so you activate that in the add-ons. And then Control Shift right click, and it makes a mix node for you. We'll put that in. We'll set the factor to about 0.3. And if you're working in Eevee, if you want to have everything look right, make sure you have screen space reflections on and turn on refraction. And then over in your material tab, for your material, go into the settings and set the blend modes to alpha hashed and the shadow modes also to alpha hash, and then activate screen space refraction. And now you get proper refractions. So this is our basic water shader, and it looks okay. I also like to add, just in case there's a lot of transmissive materials, I like to add this kind of ray depth issue. So we'll add light path, and then we'll set put a math node in there. Set it to greater than, and we want to have it so that, whoops, if our ray depth is greater than around 10, then it's going to become transparent, and we're gonna mix these two, and we'll use our greater than as our factor. So now if the ray depth gets any bigger than a threshold of 10, it'll become transparent. Using this will also help avoid getting those weird black spots I was talking about earlier on water or glass materials. I don't know what the issue is. It's something that happens when you render. And then we also sometimes want to have a nice caustic shadow. Because if you look at, we'll add a plane here so you can see the shadow, and we'll have to go into cycles. So we'll go into cycles real quick. And if you look at the shadow of the water, it kind of has some caustics, but it's not as apparent as I would like. So usually the light should be going through the water, and you see sort of like magnified sunlight in here. So we're going to go ahead and fake that a little bit using our light path node and a Musgrave texture, and also a mix RGB, and we're going to set that to multiply. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug the Musgrave texture into the bottom and plug is shadow ray into the top. And we're gonna create one more mix between the transparency and our main shader, and we're gonna use the shadow ray as our factor. Let's go ahead and adjust these Musgrave texture a little bit. So we'll set the scale to about 4.7, bring the detail all the way up, and bring the dimension down to around 0.5, and the lacunarity to around 1.7. And it's a little hard to see right here, but if you take a look at it, our shadows are a little more interesting. So here it is. See if I can show you without it and with it. You see it becomes a lot lighter, and that's what we want. So now that we have that, we can go back into Eevee, and we're not going to see it in this scene, but it's good to know for other scenes. So now it's looking a lot more like water, and we're pretty close. Okay, so we're pretty close to our end result. The last little thing you want to do is add some interaction with this water. So what I'm going to do is just make a small water simulation right here, and that way we'll see it it'll look like it's actually coming out of the water. And I'm going to hide the water simulation just underneath the surface of this pond here. And for extra realism, we can also add some dynamic paint. So I'll go ahead and set this up. We're going to bring our origin right here. Let's turn on these so we can see what we're doing. We'll add a cube, and that's going to be our domain for our water simulation. This is probably a good size. And I usually like to use flip fluids, but I'm going to use MantaFlow for this one. Let's go to physics, add fluid, domain, and set it to liquid. And then let's duplicate this, bring it down so that it's just underneath the water. I'm gonna change this to wireframe so I can see what I'm doing. Let's move this just below the water. And then set this bottom cube to flow. Liquid, geometry. And then we should be able to just bake this and it'll kind of give us something good. We'll leave the foam particles off for now because there's nothing too crazy happening. I forgot, you also want to make sure you set your water, your little water ball, to also be a fluid. We're going to set it to effector and collision, and that way it's going to affect the water as it comes up and it'll look like it's kind of coming out of the water. So now we'll go ahead and we'll bake it, and I'm going to keep the resolution pretty low just so we can kind of move along. Okay, so we got our fluid simulation baked, and I haven't made the mesh yet, but it looks like it's working pretty much fine. So we'll go ahead and bake the mesh and see how this turns out. Okay, so I baked out our fluid simulation, and I forgot that it doesn't really behave the same way as flip fluids, so you have to make sure to turn wireframe off after you finish baking. We'll set it to texture. Now we can kind of see it. It doesn't look that great because I didn't bake it at a high resolution, but we're just trying to move along here. So we'll go ahead and add our water material to our baked mesh. And it's kind of hard to see right now. Maybe I'll bake it higher for the final render. And then lastly, we're gonna click on our mesh, and that way if there are any extra waves, they kind of, well, you can pick either. So we're gonna click our water, our pool, and we're gonna go ahead and subdivide it a whole bunch of times. So go into edit mode, right click, subdivide, let's go up to 50, and then let's add a subdivision modifier. And then what we're going to do, we're going to go into the physics, click on dynamic paint, add canvas, set it to waves, and then we'll click on you can click either your baked water mesh if it's doing some really crazy stuff and you want it to interact with the waves a lot, or you can click on your little water ball and give this another dynamic paint, set it to brush, add brush, and have it be add brush, and that should be fine. And now you see it kind of creates waves as it comes up. And if you want, you could probably get away with just this. It looks pretty nice. Make sure you shade smooth. And you'll also want to bake this to make sure it behaves properly when you render it. So we'll go over to click on our water plane. Let's click on anti-aliasing too. It makes it look a little nicer. And then over here down in cache, you want to click bake, and it'll go ahead and bake our little wave effect. Actually, let's undo that bake, and let's make this another effector for the dynamic paint, just to make sure the waves kind of interact with this. So we'll add a brush here, And then we want it to be, go to the waves, we want it to be a reflect only. So it's gonna reflect the waves back and they'll behave realistically. And it's hard to see, but you can tell along the side here, the waves are interacting a little better. For this scene, the pool is small enough that you could probably just do a water simulation on the whole thing. But for larger scenes, you'd probably want to use something more along these lines so you don't have to simulate a whole giant body of water. And with that, we're pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and render this and we'll see how it looks. So that's how you do a simple water bending effect in Blender. If you want to make the water loop back into itself, you just have to stretch it out with a new shape key and have your Bezier curve loop around itself a few times. The motion blur and refraction of the water tends to hide any seams. If you want to do more complex things like water tentacles, then you need to set up an armature and stuff, but this curve animation method works just fine for most applications. Also, if you want to keep the water on screen when you release it, all you have to do is replace your water bending mesh with a simulation at the moment that you let go of the water. This is one of the reasons I like to use flip fluids, because it copies over the velocity of your mesh when you release the animation into physics. For some reason I couldn't get that to work the same way in MantaFlow. If you haven't seen my water bending video yet, please check it out. I have worked really hard on it, and it's pretty short, so it won't take you much time. I'm working on an earthbending video right now. You might have seen that little earthbending arena teaser I posted a while ago. That was a really early draft, but I'm pretty much done with it now, and I think it looks pretty decent. Big thank you to all of you who stuck around till now, and of course big thanks to all of my subscribers. And leave a comment if this helped you. Let me know if there are any other tutorials you'd like to see. Be sure to like the video and maybe consider subscribing to my channel. So until next time, see you guys later.